Hi, I'm Melissa from polkadotchair.com, and today I'm going to walk you through the steps to create the fifth block in our 2022 Quilt Block of the Month pattern called Sparkle More. Sparkle More is the name of the quilt pattern. The name of the block this month is called Moonlight. There are 5 blocks that have been released so far in this pattern, including this one, since it's the 5th month. The way the program works is you have a one-time purchase of the pattern, and then each month on the 5th of the month we send you the pattern to make another block. So there are 11 total blocks in the quilt, and then on the last month you will get some finishing instructions and instructions to make some of the alternate blocks in the quilt. There is another video walking you through how to create the first block, and then the first 4 blocks are similar in construction, so we didn't have any videos for those. But since this month we're adding a couple of techniques to the block, I've decided to go ahead and make a video for you guys. So here is the block. This block is similar to the other blocks we've made in the quilt in that it's kind of a variation on a granny square quilt block. But this block has introduced some half square triangles and quarter square triangles. So I'll walk you through how to create those blocks in the quilt. If you would like information about how to get the pattern or have questions about the quilt or the Block of the Month program, I will link to the blog post that explains everything, and also please leave a message in the comment section. I will be happy to answer them. So let's go ahead and get started making this block. The first step in constructing this block is to create half square triangles. You have 2 pieces of dark denim and 2 pieces of boy blue fabric. You're going to start with 1 piece of each. I'll just go ahead and set the other ones aside for now. On the wrong side of one of the pieces of fabric, I usually use the lighter fabric. Draw a line diagonally on the wrong side of the fabric. You can also mark it with a point turning tool, or you can use tape on your machine, but this is the most straightforward way, especially if you're new to this technique. Let's try that again. So I've just got a line marked along that diagonal. I'm going to go to my machine and I'm going to stitch a 1/4 inch on each side of the line that I drew. The next few steps, I'm going to use a rotating cutting mat. I'll link up the one that I use. After you've sewn a 1/4 inch on each side of that line, use your quilt ruler and cut along the line, which will give you 2 half square triangle blocks. Take them to your iron and press them. I usually press them towards the darker side of darker fabric. I've got 2 that I have already pressed. Now you need to trim these. These are going to be too large. We want these blocks, these squares, to be 3 3/8 inch. So I'm using a block lock ruler. I like the block lock ruler. See if I can get a good shot of this, because it has like a groove down the center that helps you line up the squares, because there's a little bit of bulk in that seam. So just line it up, and the 1/8 inch mark on here is the last mark. So this is 3 1/2, but we want it 1/8 inch shorter than that. So I've got that marked at 1/8 on both of those sides, and I'm actually going to do it a little bit more than 3/8 just because if the other 2 sides aren't square, I need a little bit of extra fabric to square those up. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to do one side. Now I'm going to slide this down so that my edges of the fabric are, I don't want to do that with the ruler, with the rotary cutter, are on the 1/8 inch mark. So you can see there's an 1/8 inch mark there, 1/8 inch mark there. And it's a good thing I left a little bit extra fabric because that wasn't perfectly square. And then trim that up. So you have a half square triangle that is 3 3/8 by 3 3/8 inches. Repeat this process again so that you have 4 total half square triangles out of the 2 blue fabrics. Then you're going to do the process another time This time you're going to do it with the white and the blue fabrics. These squares are larger, so go ahead and create the half square triangles. Do not trim it, and then I'll show you what to do next. Alright, I've repeated the process again with the blue and white squares. Now I'm going to turn these two half square triangles into 2 quarter square triangles. You only need 1 quarter square triangle for the quilt block, but I'm going to go ahead and make 2 of them. It takes the same amount of fabric, and I feel like it's just as easy this way. You're going to line these up. Well, before you do that, I feel like it's easier to go ahead and on one of them, draw a line diagonally in the opposite direction of the existing seam. So it's going across that way. Line these 2 pieces up so that the white's on top of the blue and the blue's on top of the white. And take a second and really, since these seams are facing opposite directions, you can nest them into each other. Take a second, make sure that that's really flat and nested, and stitch on 1/4 inch on each side of the line that you drew. I have stitched along that line. Hopefully you can see this. It's hard to see with white fabric. And 1/4 inch on each side of the line. Now I'm going to cut the pieces apart along the line like we did for the half square triangle. And one of them is going to be extra. The other one, you open it up and you have a 1/4 square triangle. You're going to press this, and then using the same technique that we used for the half square triangle, which I will show you if I can find where I put my ruler. Found it. Okay, using the same technique used for the other half square triangle, you're going to square up this 1/4 square triangle to 3 3/8 inches. The rest of the construction of the block is similar to the other blocks in the Quilt Along. You are going to want to refer to the directions on page 3 of your PDF to show you how to lay out the rows. I'll go ahead and quickly do that for you to kind of help you through it. You are going to begin with, let's see if make sure I get this so you guys can see as much of this as possible. Each one of these rows has 1 more square than the row before it. Alright, so you're going to sew row 1 together, row 2 together, row 3 together, row 4 together, row 5 together, and then sew each of those rows to each other. Then you're going to sew you have 2 more navy squares left over. You're going to sew those to the top and bottom, lining the centers. And then the last thing you need to do is trim the block. And I will go ahead and walk you through trimming that one more time. If you watch the first video, this will be a repeat of that process. Also, as some of you guys have asked about seam allowance to get this to be a 12.5 inch block. If you're someone that is used to sewing with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, then your blocks might be a little bit too big. This pattern, because it uses the technicality of it, is you would use a 1/16 of an inch measurement, but that's just not realistic. So you're going to want to use a full 1/4 inch seam allowance, not a scant. If you are someone who their quilt blocks usually come up a little bit too small each time, this is probably going to be perfect for you because your seam allowance is probably too large on the other ones. Also, I know on the half square triangles and the 1/4 square triangles that you did trim off quite a bit of excess fabric. The reason for that is I have found that it's easier to make blocks too large and trim them down to size, because you can't add fabric, but you can always take it away. So that's just, for me, the easiest to get it perfectly square, is to make sure I have plenty of extra fabric at the end. Alright, now your block looks like this. I have a mistake right here in this corner. I'm going to probably fix that after I finish this video. I've got my seam allowance kind of wonky there. Take the block and rotate it 45 degrees. I like to use a 12.5-inch quilt ruler for this step. If you don't have one, you can use a traditional, just any rotary cutter and ruler on a cutting mat. I don't know why that was so hard to say. What you want ideally is to have a 1/4 inch on the outside of each of these tips. So most of them are right at a 1/4 inch. Some of them might be off a little bit. You can also use these white lines on this ruler to line up for your centers. Like I said, mine's off a little bit in the center there, so I may go in and unpick that and replace that piece. All right, so I am pretty happy with how this looks. Going to trim each side, and then I'm going to let you guys know something that I discovered the hard way. So I'm going to trim this side and pull these pieces off. Now I'm going to rotate it. When you rotate, take care that you don't accidentally switch your seam allowance to the other direction, because what I had happen once was I didn't realize that as I had turned my block that my seam allowance had flipped from this direction to that direction. So when I went and trimmed my next seam, I ended up with a little bit of a hole, which I can fix easily when I sew the block together, but just something to keep in mind. So making sure all my seams are flat. Trim that next side. And at this point I can kind of use my ruler or my cutting mat to kind of line things up a little bit as I go. Making sure none of the seam allowances got flipped over. And everything is as lined up as possible. That is off. You guys can probably see that better than I can from the overhead camera angle. And trim that up. And there you have your finished Moonlight block. Each of the blocks from now on in the Quilt Along will start building on techniques. Like this week we did 1/4 square triangles and 1/2 square triangles. We're going to add rectangles and all different kinds of shapes, but we'll just go slowly step by step. I'm not sure there'll be a new video every month, but anytime that there's a new technique or something that I think might trip you guys up or something I didn't cover in a previous video, I'll be sure to link it up for you.